Okay, I think we have the go-ahead. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us after your lunch hour. And for those of you who are maybe not sure what you've stumbled into, we're here to talk about solutions and strategies to support the mental health of journalists under attack. And my name is Nadine Hoffman. I'm the Deputy Director of the International Women's Media Foundation, joined today by a fabulous panel of experts who I will introduce to you now, including Flora, Schulte, Nordholt, who is with Free Press Unlimited. She is the Policy and Advocacy Officer. And on my other side, I have Anna Zellhuber, who is a psychoanalyst and the founder of Vinland Solutions. And then also we have Nabeelah Shabbir, who works for the International Center for Journalists, where she is the Senior Research Associate at ICFJ, and also one of the co-editors of the study, The Chilling, that we'll be getting into today. And if you've come in, you'll see there's some paper, if you've sat far enough forward, on your seat. And I just want to tell you what that is. So first of all, we're going to be talking a little bit about the mental health guide that Anna wrote, that the IWMF published in December. So you have a postcard with a QR code for that. And I also just wanted to say a word about the Coalition Against Online Violence, which our organizations all represent. You have another code, a postcode for our Online Violence Resources Hub. And so I wanted to encourage you to check out those resources which will come up today in conversation. Our Coalition Against Online Violence was created in 2020, and we now have more than 70 members around the world, and we're focused on addressing online violence targeting women journalists from a cross-sector approach. So we're press freedom organizations, but we're also feminist, civic tech, and human rights groups from around the world. So if you're here today and you're interested in learning more about the work of this coalition, please find one of us after the session, and we'd be happy to tell you more about it. So I want to just say that I've seen on this conference agenda there are many mental health sessions, which is a really encouraging sign, because we know that there is still a stigma around talking about mental health in journalism. However, as we're seeing from conferences like this, where there are opportunities to have these conversations, that stigma is starting to change, and that's important. It's something that we really need to keep pushing for in order to have women and other marginalized voices able to stay in the news industry and to advance in their careers. But we want to start today by grounding this conversation in research and to have a quantitative perspective. So I'm going to start with Nabeelah, and by asking you to tell us a little bit about the recent study that you produced, ICFJ, with UNESCO, called The Chilling. And also just to say off the top that in your report, over 100 women put names to their stories of the online violence that they experienced, which is, again, a sign of progress that women are speaking out about this problem. So tell us about how many survey respondents in The Chilling talked about the mental health impacts specifically that they faced, and a little bit more just about what you found.
Thank you so much, Nadine, and thanks so much for everyone for coming. I just wanted to say, sitting next to Anna is pretty amazing, because she's going to be reminding us to breathe, and so I'm going to do that now. So before I get into the findings of our report, which was commissioned by UNESCO and with ICFJ, just wanted to share an anecdote about a journalist who I know from the UK, who's been on a waiting list to speak to a therapist for months. And that comes after years and years of suffering what she's now been told is actually PTSD because of severe online abuse that she's faced, because of the journalism that she's been doing. So that's death threats, that's rape threats against, family members, credible death threats as well. So she's experienced this combination of online violence, which is actually connected to offline violence too. So literally from seeing this harassment in her Facebook Messenger in groups to then seeing her name graffitied on walls in the city that she lives in. And so she's had a referral from a doctor to see a therapist who felt like they didn't really have the experience to sort of help her. She got a second referral to another doctor who then was a bit nervous about the fact that she's reporting on criminals and maybe it's not very safe to sort of be, in connection with her. And so the point of starting just with this little anecdote is just to say that this journalist does not report on crime anymore. This journalist doesn't work for that newsroom anymore, right? Because they also weren't providing her with counseling. She still hasn't received counseling after years and years of experiencing this harassment. And all of that is just because of because of the journalism that she's doing, right? And what I found interesting was that she told me, I didn't leave my job because I was scared of the criminals that I was reporting on. I left because I felt abandoned, because this abuse was incessant, and it's caused psychological injury to the detriment of her work. So I just wanted to start off by just saying that, the failure of her not being able to get this kind of treatment in the UK just makes you think about what it's like in other countries where, you have different societal, different cultural contexts. And we recognize that that's a really significant thing, that, we can also fail at facilitating treatment in a country where you might have access to universal healthcare, or you can't get access to a qualified psychologist. So that's just a lived experience that I wanted to share, which coincides with one of the main findings, which I wanted to share with you from the chilling, which we published last November with UNESCO and ICFJ, as I said earlier. So the mental health impact was the most frequently identified consequence of online harassment and abuse. So we had a survey which underpinned this study where we spoke to 180 women journalists, other experts, newsroom leaders, legal experts, and so on, all about online abuse. That was 26% of people who said that. And there's a statistic which we've harped on and on about, for the last couple of years, but so I'll just say it again. 73% of these survey respondents said that they had experienced online violence in the course of their journalism, but only a quarter of them had reported this to their employer. And what we found concerning in this report was that of those people who had reported it to their employers, only 10% of them, 10% of them said their employers did nothing at all. And again, a very small percentage of them actually sought medical or psychological help due to the effects of online violence. And we've got so much more data points about, in the low numbers about, what happens? Do you take days off work as a result? Did you know that your employer had, a policy about online violence, that they might have guidelines on how to deal with that kind of thing? Could you access a digital security or legal expert, a counseling service? Even do you know that there's a gender-sensitive peer support network? The answers were so poor for all of those categories. And so that's a little bit on the data, and please do check the report if you want to explore that a little bit more in detail. And I'll just round off by just talking about how that heavy toll actually presents itself. So we look at it as, it's explained in the report that it behaves like networked gaslighting. So we're interested also in this lower level of abuse. It's constant, it's moderate, it slowly burns. It's like a method of manipulation using disinformation tactics, which accumulates, and it's designed to sort of make you lose your center, generate a bit of doubt about who you are, what you're doing, and ultimately discredit your work as a journalist. And we've spoken to so many journalists who explained how they felt that their confidence was undermined in doing their work with all of this abuse that they were getting, multi-platform, all times of day. It's in your bedroom, it's in your house, it's in the shopping, you check your phone, you're being harassed because of something you've reported on. And so at some point you can even question your understanding of reality. We look at how part of that is an organized or semi-organized network of abusers who are sort of causing a pile-on. We look at how it can be manipulating search results on the internet so that you can't even find your professional work anymore because there's all this disinformation-led tactics, again, designed to malign you as a journalist. Doxing, your details released online, which can lead to physical violence, of course. And I just want to end by saying, there are, of course, additional risks that you can face as a journalist if you have differing identities. So, if it doesn't matter if you're a freelancer, it doesn't matter if you're part of a newsroom, and there probably will be a lack of diversity, I guess, where you might be working. And, that has to be properly accounted for in itself. But abuse at an intersectional level, if you're gay, if you've got an ethnic minority background, if you come from a sectarian context, if you're Jewish, there's just extra levels of risk that you are exposed to. And we're interested in that because that can morph into physical assault and, most importantly, cause significant psychological injury.
Thank you, and I'm glad you brought up the layers of risk. That's a really important point. And we're going to come back to the duty of care of newsrooms toward the end of this conversation, because that's also a really important point. But next I want to turn to you, Anna, as the author of this guide on mental health for victims experiencing online attacks, because you've worked with thousands, is it fair to say? Yeah, thousands of journalists around the world who are experiencing all kinds of violence, whether it's online or offline, about how to empower themselves to take back the power that they feel that they've lost when they experience this kind of an attack. And I think this is a key focus of our discussion today, because we want the journalists in this room to understand sort of the tools that they can use in this mental health guide, but just very simply, how to sort of reframe and start to get control back. So tell us a little bit about sort of the key concepts in this guide and what people should be taking away from it.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting me to this panel, and thank you all for being here. But I wanted to take some of the words that Nabeelah said, because I think that says a lot. She didn't leave the kind of work she was doing when you were talking about her because she was afraid. She did it because she felt alone. And this happens, and I want to point this out, because a lot of people says online violence. You just don't listen to them. But what we don't realize is that online violence is like having them at your home. Because you're sitting in your table, you're sitting in your couch, and they are attacking you there. So the sense of it, it's even more so that if you are attacked on the street, outside, because then you come home and you feel safe. But with online violence, they're coming to your home. You are getting threatened at your home, so you don't feel safe anywhere. And that's a very important thing, because most of the work has taught me, working with people who journalists that had been attacked, that those who had been attacked online feel that they're going crazy, that they cannot trust anyone or anything, that they cannot be with friends anymore because they are putting their friends in danger, because they don't know when these people that is entering my house is going to actually show at my home or at the restaurant or at the university or wherever I am with my family or my friends. And when you're attacked online, not only you are, it's your family who's been attacked, because your family's life is going to change completely. If you are living violence, for example, being a war journalist, covering war, you're at war, but your family's home safe. And yes, you're living awful things, and yes, you're going to have to work to avoid PTSD, or if you already have it, you're going to have to work on your PTSD. But your family is back home safe. But when you are attacked online, your whole family comes to be involved in it. And that is what's the most scary part of all of this. Of course, there are trolls. And trolls, poor things. And I'm sorry, but I have to say, poor things that believe that they are not important, that believe that their lives have no meaning, and they're attacking you just to have a bit of taste of the importance of the people looking at you. But there are these other cases in which your life is at risk, in which is your government persecuting you, either you are at your country or outside of it. Because, and this is another important part, it doesn't matter where you are. For example, in Mexico, I am from Mexico City, journalists, we all know they are not safe. It's the second country in the world with higher attacks to journalists. But once they are relocated, some of them have to, I have accompanied many of them in the process of relocation, they feel safe again in the UK or in the US or in another Central American country. But with online abuse, it doesn't matter. I have journalists that are from a different country and are now living in the UK or are now living on the US. But as the attack is online, they're still being attacked. How can you relocate someone who's been attacked online? There's no way. So the persecution crosses borders. And we need to make conscious of this. We need to not say, it's not that much, because we are always denying the impact for the social life, for the family life, for the psycho-emotional aspects that this has. And this is the first thing that we need to do. For example, when I am working with a patient that is being harassed online, the first thing I do is saying, you really are not going crazy. The only crazy people here is the one that is attacking you. They are attacking you because you are doing a good job and they feel threatened by that job. And it is normal, it's a normal response, the one that you're having, for an abnormal situation. Understanding this is key to say, okay, so it's normal that I feel attacked at my home, even if it's online. It's normal to think that I am feeling anxious, that I can't sleep, that I cannot eat or I eat too much, that my whole family is anxious with me, that my whole life has changed, that I'm thinking about leaving journalism, that I'm thinking about moving elsewhere and stop writing. Because online abuse, even though it doesn't threaten the life directly, sometimes they do direct threats, and they are credible threats. But even if it doesn't, if it's a troll, because I've had patients who have had problems with trolls, their lives has never been at risk. But they feel like that because a troll, a simple troll, and I say a simple troll because it's tiny compared to a government attacking you. A simple troll is what they are doing is they are killing you as a journalist. Because journalism means writing, means showing your photos to the public. And if you're not feeling safe by doing so, because each time you write something, each time you post a photo, you're being attacked, you stop doing it. And if your life, your physical life is a threat, even more so. So it's the killing of the profession, it's the killing of the journalists, not of the human being as such, but it's killing the journalist. And this is huge, because how many hours do we spend working? 8, if we are very mild, but usually 10 to 12 for journalists. So half time of your life is spent being a journalist. And then they attack that, and you cannot do it anymore. Half of your life is dead. So what to do? And Nabeelah was saying, we are going to make a short exercise at the end so that you can all relax after listening to all these numbers and all these things. But yes, breathe, and obviously it's important to have always a risk assessment of the situation. That's key first, to approach an organization that can help you, any of them, that can help you make a risk assessment to know how much of your real life, I mean your life not online, is at risk, and to get the help. Because, yeah, they feel lonely. They feel that nobody is listening. Their medias, and I know we're going to go at the end, but I'm going to say it twice, have a responsibility which they are avoiding. The newsrooms are avoiding their responsibility in this case, and they shouldn't be. They should be responsible for the attacks that their journalists, either they are freelancers or they are working permanently there, are getting for doing their jobs.
Thank you, Anna. And just to say, for those who just came in, and if you're in the back, in the front, we have cards with a QR code with the mental health guide that Anna wrote that we published in December. It's certainly not a replacement for working with a therapist directly, but it has a lot of very practical advice that we hope that people will be able to use. So now I'm going to turn to Flora and ask a little bit about the important work that you've been doing in establishing peer-to-peer support networks at Free Press Unlimited, and you've been doing this in different regions. So we'd love to hear just about this sort of blueprint that you've been building of practical support for journalists facing attacks. What's been working, anything that maybe hasn't worked that we could learn from as we all try to address this problem.
Yeah, thanks, Nadine, and thanks everyone for being here. So at FPU, the psychological effects of online violence are an important part of our work on the safety of journalists. And we do that through projects and through advocacy. So on the one hand, we try to look for solutions for journalists in need. And on the other hand, we're really focused on creating this enabling environment for journalists to feel safe in and to thrive in. And we really believe that it's important that these two exist alongside each other. But let me focus on solutions here for a sec. So something that we found is that peer-to-peer support networks can be really effective in addressing mental health issues for journalists. And we've had some experience in setting up these networks. We've set up these networks in the Balkans and in Kenya, specifically for women journalists. And we've set this up in Thailand for Burmese journalists in exile, so both men and women journalists. And from these networks, we've really learned some valuable lessons that I want to share here today. What we found is that there are certain cross-border elements that show that peer-to-peer support can be effective and helpful across different cultures and regions. Provided that, and this is important, provided that certain elements are met. And I'd just like to zoom in on 3 of these important elements. That's localization, that's trust, and that's contextualization. So localization, by localization, I mean that a network is clearly delineated by societal boundaries such as language and culture, but also that a local partner organization is in the lead. And this is really important because we found that local organizations are in such close proximity to the journalists in such a network that they're best equipped to identify and manage the risks that they see within these networks. And on top of that, local organizations really create greater trust among these networks, which brings me to my second point, trust. A support network without trust will not be able to provide support. It's as simple as that. We really need trust in these support networks. And trust is something that doesn't get built overnight. Trust is something that takes time, and trust is something that takes effort. So what we found is that when setting up these networks, it's really important to be prepared to invest the time and the effort in creating this trust among these journalists. And then lastly, but not least, contextualization. And by this, I mean that a simple copy-paste of a support network from one region to the other simply won't work. Prior field research is needed into the specific context that you want to set up this blueprint in, and important questions need to be answered. Some of these questions are, what are the specific risks for example, women journalists in that region? Where are these risks coming from? Are they mostly from within the newsrooms, or are they coming from outside of the newsrooms? Is the country stable where you want to set up this support network in? And especially this last one is an interesting one, because this is something that we learned in Thailand with these Burmese journalists in exile. When your basic needs aren't met, so when you're worried about a bed to sleep in that night or a meal to eat that day, solely psychological support and mental health support is probably not going to be at the top of your list. That's not saying it's not important. It's just saying to be mindful of the context you're setting up these support networks in and the support you're providing to these people in these contexts. That being said, in more stable regions, such as the Balkans and in Kenya, and by stable, I don't mean a lack of violence. By stable, I mean journalists can do their job day to day. They're not in exile, there's no war, there's no crisis. So in stable environments, we've really found that peer-to-peer support can be a very low threshold way to provide mental health support to journalists, can relieve feelings of isolation, and in the case of women journalists, can be a really great place of empowerment as well. So to conclude here, we've really found these cross-border elements that show that under the right circumstances, peer-to-peer support is really a great way to address mental health issues.
Thank you for sharing your experiences. So I want to make sure we do leave time at the end for your questions, but I have one more round for our panelists, and as Anna previewed, we are going to do a small exercise, so we'll ask you all to be open to that. But turning back to Nabeelah, I want to switch gears to the other big initiative that ICFJ has been working on, which is the early warning system for online violence, and specifically how that could help us to spot cases where journalists' mental health would be at risk in advance. So can you just tell us a little bit about what the early warning system is and how that could work to actually help for mental health?
Thank you, Nadine. And also I wanted to thank Flora for sharing those details of how it works in all different contexts. It's really helpful to put this all in perspective, and also Anna for just clarity. I feel like when I listen to you, I get a bit emotional because it is a really hard topic, and it is so good to hear it from a medical, professional perspective. So before I mention the EWS, which is the early warning system that we're working on at ICFJ, just wanted to talk a little bit about the context of a lot of this research that we did since over the last couple of years. And definitely I wanted to not shout out the pandemic, but it's played a major part in escalating this problem. It's further heightened the risk because news organizations especially, we all were more reliant on being online and communicating digitally, and that has definitely played a factor in sort of this being a more prevalent an issue. And I also wanted to point out the fact that journalists are increasingly having to adapt to these emerging and increasingly sophisticated threats. There's like viral disinformation, sometimes that we don't even, it's not understandable by definition, and digital conspiracy networks. And in all of that, I would say the focus at ICFJ is definitely that it's essential to assess the responses of news organizations, as has also been mentioned here. And so part of the raft of things that need to be done is to definitely fully understand that there is a gendered nature of these attacks, and appreciate the fact that workplace injury is also psychological injury, that it's serious, these impacts that they have. There's a lot of insensitive, counterproductive victim blaming in a lot of the countries where we were reported from. We had insights from 15 different countries in the chilling. Behaviors that are speech restrictive for journalists. And, a massive one is that you have to shift the onus for managing gendered violence from an individual journalist under attack, to the news organizations that hire them, to the political actors who are frequently instigating and fueling those attacks, and the digital platforms which are vectors, as we call them, of this abuse. So just to put that out there a second time, move to a position of understanding that psychological trauma is a workplace injury, just as as a way to shift how we look at this problem. And so the angle that we've gone in at with this is that the types of attack that are escalating that risk of psychological injury is something that we want to monitor, right? So that you can have a way of appropriately intervening. So rather than dealing with the after effect of this happening to you as a journalist, getting in there before. And one of our findings in the chilling, which we've also sort of alluded to here, is that a credible threat of offline violence can be seeded in online violence. So as I mentioned earlier, the journalists in the UK harangued in Facebook groups, rape threat against her baby, and then she goes outside and there's her name, with like gun crosshairs on the wall. That's a direct online-offline trajectory. And so 1 in 5 women journalists said they'd experienced that kind of harassment, be it in Mexico, be it in Sri Lanka, be it, wherever. And so this finding in the chilling led to us getting support from the UK government, ironically of all places, because I've been slagging off the UK a little bit today. The idea is to develop an early warning system which can detect the abuse and monitor the abuse and alert, let's say, news organizations to incidents online which can be significant as potential threats, which can escalate to offline harm. And it's one way to try to understand this problem more deeply. It's experimental. We definitely don't know. We know a little bit of what it looks like right now because we've started working with a dashboard where we're collaborating with colleagues at the University of Sheffield in the computer science department, and they're using natural language processing, and we've had using that funding, we've looked at languages like Mexican Spanish. Weirdly, we looked at the case of Carmen Aristegui in Mexico, who's quite a prominent, also I think reports for CNN, I think, has a show, and has been so attacked. Her son has been attacked to the extent, he's young, to the extent that he had to leave the country. And so we developed, for example, this, looking at all that Mexican Spanish abuse that she's getting online, that her child is getting online, that her colleagues are getting, her sources, and trying to classify it so that we can see if it's gendered attacks, we can see if it's, a racist attack, and we can try to sort of look at the trajectories we can try to identify patterns so that we can prevent those threats from becoming a physical manifestation. Online violence is also offline violence, right? So we've said that 100 times today. And we're also happy to say that, and we talked about this in a panel yesterday, so do go and check that out. It was another ICFJ panel, but we have secured additional funding from Luminate, which is also a philanthropic organization. So this is not just that it's a UK government funded prototype, but for the next 3 years, we're going to be hopefully producing what looks like a dashboard for news organizations to use, but also potentially civil society organizations, so that we can monitor real-time attacks and provide some kind of conduit for reporting on it and alerting responders and linking the psychological with the social, with the legal, with the digital response that you need. And we're also working with the OSCE on a kind of monitoring guidance document. So there's like 14 different indicators, one being, online leads to offline harm. And one of the key ones is a large-scale attack can increase your risk of psychological harm. And all of that ties in with wanting a more gender-aware newsroom culture. As I'm just going to end on a quote from a Kenyan journalist who we reported on, who we spoke to for the chilling, who said, having a thick skin doesn't protect you from a personal attack, which leads to your data being shared, which leads to someone promising you that they'll rape you when you get out of your office that day.
Wow, thank you. Well, I think that all the newsrooms that are represented here might want to be following the dashboard that you're building so that they can also benefit from that. That's fantastic. Anna, I'm coming back to you after we go to Flora. And so we've already talked a little bit about duty of care here and research to support that journalists aren't reporting or newsrooms aren't providing support. But you also have some recent research that shows that few women journalists do go to their managers when they're under attack. And so this also comes back to that issue of stigma. So what can we do to de-stigmatize those conversations in newsrooms? And what is the duty of care that newsrooms have to their journalists when they're facing online attack?
Yeah, thanks for this important question, Nadine. Like I briefly stated in my previous answer, our work at FPU is not just focused on these projects such as peer-to-peer support. It's also very much focused on advocacy, on creating this enabling environment for journalists to feel safe in. And the reason I'm saying this is because these solutions we're talking about, so solutions such as peer-to-peer support networks, they're all very reactive to a problem. The problem being online violence in this case, online gender-based violence. And I'd just like to stress the importance of a preventative approach alongside of this reactive approach. And for this preventative approach, we really need action, and we need responsibility from different stakeholders. So one of them being newsrooms, like you said, but also governments and platforms. Because this destigmatization, like you said, is such an important first step in addressing online violence, in destigmatizing mental health around online violence. But we can't just look at the journalistic community to destigmatize this. We really need all actors here. So I'd just like to zoom in on these three stakeholders here for a sec. So to start off with newsrooms, like you said, recent research in the Netherlands that we pushed for shows that 37% of women journalists that face online violence don't go to their employer to report this. And this number is even higher for freelancers. It's 45%. So these extremely high numbers really show the need for a culture shift within newsrooms where online violence is taken seriously and where it's not just part of the job. And that brings with it a duty of care. So this duty of care can manifest in different ways, right? We can think of creating and implementing policies specifically aimed at the online safety of women journalists. But we can also think of offering digital security trainings as part of the onboarding process for employers, and perhaps specifically women employers. Either way, we really need an active engagement of these newsrooms to create this environment where women journalists, and all journalists for that matter, feel safe to report violence, but not just that they feel safe, it's also that they feel they're taken seriously. So that's the responsibility of the newsrooms, and I'd just like to touch upon governments here as well, as governments also have a really important responsibility in creating laws and regulations that pave the way for online violence to be able to be persecuted. And having rules and regulations in place is basically what we're doing, is we're creating a consensus in society that says, hey, this is online violence, this is not okay, and we do not tolerate this. So there's a big void for governments there as well to step up to their responsibility in addressing the issue. And then lastly, but definitely not least, sometimes the big elephant in the room is the platforms. So we really can't be discussing these solutions such as support networks, all these responsibilities of different actors, of newsrooms, of journalists in particular, without addressing the responsibility of the stakeholder whose product is facilitating the online violence that's leading to all this mental health, right? So to this day, the vast majority of online attacks are not only met with impunity, but are also met with a lack of responsiveness from the platforms. So something specific we advocate for here is escalation channels within platforms. So that's real people and real teams within platforms where violence can be reported to be taken down quickly. And it's important to note here that these escalation channels, it's important that these teams speak the language and understand the culture of the violence that the violence is happening in. And just to tie this briefly to my previous answer, what we found is that specifically women support, peer-to-peer support networks can be really great places to function as escalation channels as well. Provided they have the capacity and the resources, of course. They're in such close proximity to violence happening on the ground that they can really be these great intermediaries between online attacks that women are facing in a society and action from the platforms. So to conclude with the point I'm trying to make here is that in addressing online violence, in destigmatizing mental health around online violence, we really need a multi-stakeholder approach, and we really need all these different actors to live up to their different responsibilities as well.
Indeed, we do. We could have a whole other conversation about the platforms, many of which are not, we think, in attendance here, but they should be. Yeah. All right, Anna, I'm going to invite you to close us out before we take some questions from the audience. If there's a final point you wanted to make, and then we'll get into our interactive exercise.
Yeah, more than a final point is an invitation to take into consideration mental health and to stop thinking that we are weak if we need help, that we are weak if we feel that we're, because that's not the case, okay? It's the opposite. The strongest person is that who can feel, manage the feelings in a way in which can react to them properly. That's strength. The other is being tough and weak. So I just wanted to point that out, okay? And what we are gonna do today, okay, it's the main exercise for all kinds of mental health, for everything that takes us to mental health. And we need to consider putting in our routine, making a routine on our lives. A routine that includes, obviously, good food, good drinking, enough water consumption, that includes work, obviously, and ratifying work, but that also includes relaxation and joy. We have to compensate, to balance life, especially all of you working in a media in which is facing violence and awful things all day. You need to balance life, okay? So I would suggest that you start for 1 week. It's like a challenge, okay? Just 1 week. Give me 1 week, starting your day with one song. Singing and dancing one song. That's it. That's not so hard. It is 3 minutes, 4 minutes. You can start your day dancing and singing one song. Your mood is going to switch. Your brain is going to produce something called peptides that is different to the ones you're producing during work. And that's going to change your whole endocrinal system, your whole bloodstream system, okay? And also, part of the challenge is to breathe 3 times a day properly. Yes, we all breathe, but are you doing it properly? So for now, I would ask you to lay down like this, okay? I'm going to stand so you can hear me, so you can see me. And you're going to put one hand here and one heart in your stomach, okay? And just make a breath, just breathe, okay? And I'm just watching, okay? Many of you are breathing just from your chest. Few are breathing properly from the stomach and the chest. Good for you. But most of you are just breathing from your chest. And that is half breathing. That means you are half oxygenating. And one of the causes of stress is physical stress. Lack of food, lack of water, and lack of oxygen would cause stress. So let's lower that one, okay? You have timelines to set. You have running jobs. But at least take care of your physics so that it won't be stressed too. All right? So we're going to do 3 cycles of breathing in which you're going to breathe first, inhaling, and first your stomach, then your chest in a count of 3. You're going to hold your breath for a count of 3, and then you're going to exhale everything through your nose. First, de-inflating your stomach, then your chest. And we're going to repeat this 3 times. I'm going to be accompanying you, but please feel free to do it at your pace. Everyone is different, okay? So, one hand to the stomach, another hand to the chest. Close your eyes, and 1 breathing slowly, stomach fast, chest second, 2, 3. Hold your breath, 2, 3. Exhale. Stomach fast, chest second, 2, 3. One more time. Inhale slowly, stomach fast, chest second, 2, 3. Hold your breath, 2, 3. Exhale, stomach fast, chest second, 2, 3. And one last time. Inhale slowly. Hold your breath. Exhale slowly. And that's it. It wasn't so hard, right? It took us a minute. 3 minutes plus 3 minutes of a song. It takes 6 minutes a day. And don't tell me you don't have them, because you do. 6 minutes a day to have a better health, mentally and physically.
Thank you. That's a beautiful place for us to close this conversation. I hope everyone feels a little lighter. And I think we have time for one or two questions. If anyone has a question, I see two hands here. Do we have a microphone? We have a microphone. So the lady in the red shirt in the middle, and then we have a question in the front row.
Thank you. I'm an investigative journalist from Finland, and I would like to ask about this issue, which is quite high, rising all over the world. That's populism. The parties that are populist parties, we have in Finland True Finns, in Sweden also that kind of parties, and everywhere we have them. And they are very active on this online violence. What can we do about that? Because it's also, in many countries, a mainstream. They are going to governments, they are ruling. How can we fight for that?
Thanks for your question, and we're very aware of the case also of Jessica Aro, who works for... She's your colleague, yeah, who experienced horrific online abuse and took her trolls to court, and I think came out on the right side, if I'm correct. So check out her case, Google her, Jessica Aro. It's super, super interesting. And we're definitely aware of those trends, and we've been tracking them. We've got like a whole chapter on that in the Chilling report. And I guess one thing that's important to do, and it's what we're sort of trying to do with this dashboard, is look at that kind of networked organization of how people attacking you online might actually be connected to each other. So once again, if you check out the panel that we did yesterday, we had an interactive dashboard explanation. I'm definitely not a computer scientist, so cannot explain it in a sophisticated way. But from a journalist perspective, what I've understood that we're doing is that you're able to see the amount of time that you're going to, well, when you post online, we can see how quickly somebody responds to you. We're looking at all the replies that you're going to get to your tweet, anyone else who replied to it, and we can actually look at a graph of all of those people and actually sometimes see that they are connected to each other, and maybe that comes as part of a bigger thing, and maybe you can eventually lead it back to some kind of state-led, in more cynical situations, as has happened to Maria Ressa, the Filipino-US journalist from Rappler, who actually produced that kind of an investigative journalism system within her own digital media in the Philippines as a way of responding to that kind of attack and figuring out that speed of response that we're tracking, looking at who the profiles are, and also lately with Twitter, for example, that some of those suspended trolls or whoever have actually been re-platformed and got their accounts back. And in that way, sort of turn investigative journalism back on what's happening to you. Not everybody can do this, of course, and not everyone we don't even have this dashboard completely developed yet. But I know there's just so many examples. Like we spoke to a journalist in the US for MSNBC who had such severe abuse when another journalist on a broadcast show doxed her. She was getting nonstop calls. She had to leave her house for 2 weeks. She was actually just building a spreadsheet and keeping track of who was harassing her. And it suggests that the onus is on the journalist to do that. But I think this is one way of documenting what's happening. I now feel like I'm playing into tired stereotypes that you have to document yourself what you're doing. But we're trying to, at least from ICFJ's perspective, build this kind of tool where, with the inspiration of Rappler as well, see how those accounts are all connected to each other and find some kind of deeper truth to understanding who it is that's attacking you and where it's coming from. That's not even to mention platforms like Kiwi Farms or, I shouldn't have promoted them now, but, like really the darker corners of the web where there's mobilization happening against women journalists.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one more. So I have it in the front row. Where is our microphone? Can we bring it up here? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Nella. I'm student journalism from Antwerp. I went yesterday to Nabeelah's panel and I found it so interesting. And I also went to the Missing Voices of Women of Color panel. And I was wondering, are there specific strategies, because women of color are still not represented in newsrooms, are there special strategies to reach out to them, to support them if they're victims of online violence and offline violence?
I can say a word about this unless somebody feels strongly. Yeah. I mean, I think so. The Coalition Against Online Violence, which our 3 organizations are all a part of, this is really an area of focus, is particularly marginalized identities, right? And as you talked about, the layers of risk increase as you have more of those identities. So if you are a woman who identifies as LGBT, or if you are Black, or if you are a minority religion in your country of work. So this is certainly an area where we are trying to make sure that those folks who need it the most are getting access to the resources that all of our organizations have developed to support. So I would definitely point people back to our online violence resource hub as a good starting place, but also just to know that many of the organizations who are part of the coalition, including the IWMF, do offer emergency support resources, and that includes from mental health, so therapy grants, to actually just safety consultations to help individuals be better protected against online violence. So there are resources. It's a matter of making sure people know where to find them. And I think we are we at our time, or we have another moment or two? Oh. We are at time. Thank you so much for coming out to be part of this conversation. Thank you to our panelists.